A lot of people were kind of wondering what Outliers means. We had questions at the last event. We had some emails. A lot of people just didn't understand what that meant. And we kind of left it we chose that theme as a deliberately vague theme. And it's very open-ended. And the stories you're going to hear tonight really run the gamut of anything that could possibly be related to the theme of Outliers. Other themes that we've had in the past are much more narrow and specific. The next one, March 26th, is Paws and Claws. So a little more specific, but anything in the animal realm there. But I think Outliers, it was kind of a fun thing to try because we got a huge range of different stories, so we hope you enjoy them. First storyteller is Mike Lovell. Mike is a teacher and theater director at Colby Sawyer College. He likes to ski and fish, but mostly what he loves is listening to stories, and he's very excited to be here. So welcome our first storyteller, Mike Lovell.
I'll try to keep my story brief and to the point, but I'm fearful that that is not my forte. I was just talking to Evan Dibvig, and he told me that your opening line is very important, and you need a hook. So here's my hook. I don't like boats. I really don't. I never did. I don't like being on boats. I also don't like water, and I especially don't like salt water. But I love fishing. And that's the reason why I was such good friends with Paul. Paul was a buddy of mine, and he and I went fishing almost every single day for many, many years. But I ended up kind of getting back into bike racing. I was a bike racer, and I stopped fishing so much. And once I stopped fishing, I wasn't spending an awful lot of time with my buddy Paul. So he came over to my house one day, and he asked me if I wanted to go fishing with him on his boat in the ocean. And I wasn't really enthusiastic about the idea. It was a really cold and rainy day, and his boat, I really didn't feel the thing was ocean worthy. It was a 14-foot aluminum rowboat. I didn't like to be out on the ocean in it, but I agreed to go just because I hadn't been spending a lot of time with my friend. So we drove down to the ocean. We launched the boat off of Hampton Beach in New Hampshire. We start fishing in the mouth of the Hampton River. And as soon as I'm fishing, my attitude completely changed. I really started having a good time. And I was actually catching fish. We're drifting through up and down the river. I'm catching fish. I'm having a great time. And when Paul looked up at the horizon and he said, "What's this jerk doing? He's coming right at us." I kind of ignored it. I looked over my shoulder and I saw this big fishing trawler. And it was on the horizon, and it's motoring towards our little boat. But I figure, Paul's the captain of our boat. I'll let him deal with it. So I actually make another cast. A couple of minutes later, though, when Paul says, "Whoa, this guy's really coming at us. I can't ignore this trawler anymore. The trawler is coming towards us, and it steered itself a little bit more directly towards us. So now we've got this big fishing trawler coming towards our little rowboat. And I was thinking that, the guy was making a real jerk move to steer a fishing trawler so close to a little rowboat. And I could tell from the direction he was going that he was going to come within about 30 feet of our boat. And I'm picturing that the wake coming off this trawler was going to be pretty severe. And but I really wasn't too worried. I'm a ski coach, and I think I have pretty good balance, and I'm picturing myself kind of surfing on our boat as this other trawler comes by us. So I'm not that worried, but Paul appropriately decides that we should get the heck out of there. And we have an outboard motor on our little rowboat, and Paul wants to get us out of there quick, so he grabs the throttle. But it's a little bit of a panic situation because this trawler is kind of coming towards us, and gives it a little bit too much throttle too fast, and he stalls the engine out. For the first time ever, the outboard motor stalls. So Paul starts pulling on the pull rope like a maniac, trying to get this outboard motor to start again. And I'm looking at this boat, and as he's doing that, the fishing trawler turns a little bit more, and now it's coming a little bit more directly at us. And I can kind of calculate that the thing is now actually going to hit our little rowboat. I figure when it does hit us, it's going to be sort of a glancing blow. I think the bow is going to push our little rowboat off to the side, and I'm picturing us kind of just sliding down the side of the trawler. And I'm figuring, well, we probably have a 50-50 chance of not even tipping over. Paul was pulling on the rope, and he kind of gives up on it and turns around and starts waving his arms and screaming at the trawler. And I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking, well, that's the only plan we have in action right now, so I should do the same thing. So now we're both standing in a rowboat, we're flapping our arms, and we're screaming at a fishing trawler. But I'm looking up at the trawler, and at this point, the trawler is very, very close to us, and all I see is the bow. At first, when it was a little further away, I could see the windows of the bridge. But now, I just see this big towering bow coming at our little tiny rowboat. I can't see any windows. I know no one in the bridge who's steering this boat can see us. And I realize that this thing is actually going to run over our little rowboat. Paul, at this point, dives into the bottom of the boat and starts searching for the Coast Guard mandated whistle that, and I'm thinking, like, he's lost his mind because the boat is 25 feet away from us. Even if they hear his whistle, they can't stop. I start making an exit strategy. I figure I'm going to stay in this boat to the last second. As soon as this trawler hits us, I am going to jump clear of it and let everything happen in back of me. Except the trawler hit us so violently and so suddenly that I couldn't jump anywhere. I tried to jump out of the boat, but the bow of this fishing trawler just hit me in the side of the head and the shoulder, and I slid down the bow of the trawler and started sliding down the hull. And now I'm underwater sliding down the hull of a fishing trawler. And I start thinking, the propellers are going to chop me up into little bits before I come out the other side. I'm really afraid of that. I actually don't know whether that would happen, but it does happen. And so I managed to flip myself over. I got my head down low. I got my feet up against the bottom of the hull of the trawler, and I just pushed off and started swimming towards the bottom of the ocean. And I swam down as hard as I could. I swam down with all my might. I had a rain gear on. I had this yellow raincoat on. And all the air pockets in the raincoat were making me really, really buoyant. And it was really, really hard to swim down. And I was just cringing, hoping that the propeller blades of the trawler didn't chop me up as it went over. And I just kept swimming down with all my might. I was picturing the propeller blades as if I was watching it in a movie, like some special effects in a movie. I'm seeing them spinning there and churning, and I'm swimming down to the bottom of the ocean. And finally, I can't hold my breath anymore, and I have to swim back up to the surface. And as I'm swimming back up to the surface, I'm praying that I don't just swim up into the propellers. But I get to the surface and I realize that I had been under for just a stupidly long time. The trawler's at least 150 yards away. So I was swimming in the ocean. And it was so quiet and calm swimming in the ocean. And it was so different than the last frantic seconds on our little boat that I had this great sense of well-being. I was actually quite happy. I was singing a little song. I'm not a very good swimmer. In fact, every time I go out in a boat, I always kind of speculate, if I fell out of this boat right now, would I be able to swim to shore? The answer I give myself is always, no way. But somehow I look at shore and I think, I could swim there. So I take off swimming. And I'm not a great swimmer. The only stroke I have is the side stroke. And when you do the side stroke, you can't really look at where you're going. But I didn't really want to look at where I was going anyway, because I knew my progress would just be excruciatingly slow, and I wanted to see big chunks of progress. So I figured what I'm going to do is I'm going to swim until I feel like I'm almost at shore. And then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to pick a spot to get out of the water. So I aim myself at shore and I start swimming. And I swim and I swim and I swam until I really felt like I should be pretty close to shore. I was actually worrying about maybe bumping my head on someone's dock or on a moored boat or something. And it was the most disheartening thing I've ever seen in my life when I finally stopped swimming, thinking I was close to shore, and looked around, and I was at least a mile further from shore than I was when I started swimming. I was in a current that was sweeping me away from land. And suddenly I realized there was no way I was going to swim to shore. And it was a really, really weird feeling to know that there was nothing I could do to save myself, that I was completely dependent on someone coming along and saving my life. I wasn't really thinking that clearly. I wasn't really thinking straight. I started to think about how lucky Paul was for still being in the boat. It never occurred to me that the boat should have bobbed to the surface right where the collision happened, right where I came to the surface. Somehow in my head, I convinced myself that Paul had taken the boat and found another spot to go fishing. But Paul wasn't fishing. The last time that the trawler was making a slow left turn as it hit us. It wasn't really watching where it was going. And the last time the trawler, the last turn it made, it aimed exactly at the center of our little rowboat. It exactly T-boned us. And when it did, rather than our boat sliding down one side or the other of the trawler, our little boat just flipped up against the bow. I had jumped out. The water pressure of the trawler pushing the boat backwards or upside down through the water actually folded the little aluminum boat up like a clamshell, and it clamped onto the bow of the trawler. Paul, being a good captain, stayed in the boat. So he was actually clamped by our little boat to the bow of a trawler by his legs. And he went for a ride. The trawler just goes. Paul also, at this point, wasn't thinking too clearly, and he told me that he felt like there must be some kind of death crew of skeletons steering this boat, and their sole intention was to kill him. And since the impact didn't kill him, it was going to take him to the breakwater off the Hampton beach and ram him into the rocks and pulverize him, because that's where the boat went. It started aiming for the breakwater. It goes to the breakwater off of Hampton Beach. But when it gets to the breakwater, even though it was kind of a cold, rainy day, there's a lot of people standing out there looking at the ocean. And they see a trawler going by with a little tiny boat stuck to its bow with a guy clamped there by the little boat. And everyone on the breakwater starts jumping up and down and waving their arms and pointing to my friend Paul stuck to the front of the boat. The captain doesn't really know what's going on, the captain of the trawler, but he sees a lot of people signaling him from the breakwater, so he slows down. He throttles down. When he does, the water pressure is relieved, and the little boat comes off the front of the trawler. And instantly, Paul, whose legs are kind of crushed, starts to sink. But people on the breakwater start ripping off their shirts, taking off their shoes, and they dive into the water, and they swim out, and they drag Paul back to the shore. Paul gets back on the shore, though, and he says, there was another guy in that boat with me. And he starts calling my name. He stands on the breakwater, and he starts going, Mike, Mike. So now everyone on the breakwater is calling my name. But they have no idea that I'm 2 miles away right now, swimming in the ocean. At this point, I was really, really sorry that I had tried to swim to shore, because it had gotten me really tired. And it was becoming a real struggle just to stay on the surface of the water. My raincoat, my big yellow raincoat that I had on when I first was in the water, had all kinds of air pockets in it. And it was helping me stay buoyant. But after a while, it became really saturated with water. And the more it got saturated, I felt like it was weighing me down. I felt like it was trying to make me sink. And I kept trying to take the thing off. I wanted to take off the raincoat, but I couldn't take off the raincoat because every time to do it meant I had to stop swimming. And every single time I stopped swimming, I'd start sinking. And once I started sinking, it just seemed like the wrong thing to do. I'd get really, really panicky, and I'd swim back to the surface. And I couldn't take the raincoat off very fast because I had to undo all the buckles, and I had to do it all just with one hand because in my right hand, I was carrying my sunglasses. Because when I first got hit by the trawler and went under it and I was swimming down towards the bottom, I was trying to swim away from the propellers. And I stayed down there as long as I could because I wanted to make sure this trawler cleared me. I stayed down there till I thought my lungs were going to explode. And when I turned to come to the surface, I had to do it all of a sudden. So I turned to swim to the surface, and when I did, my sunglasses came off my face, and they start sinking down in front of me. These are my Oakley fishing glasses. They were the most extravagant thing I'd ever bought in my life. They cost me $220. I loved these sunglasses. So even though I thought I was going to drown, I turned and I started swimming back towards them. And I start chasing them down into the depths. But I'm still really buoyant, and I can't quite keep up with them. And they're disappearing into the murky darkness. So I took my arm, and I made this Hail Mary plunge into the darkness. I just stuck my arm out. I didn't see where it was going, and I closed my fingers, and it was like a miracle. I had my sunglasses. So when I bobbed to the surface, I was thinking, this is like great. I lived through the boat crash. I got my sunglasses. Life is good. Even later, when I started to get really tired and it became a real struggle to stay above the surface of the water, I still, for some reason, hung on to those sunglasses. I was bike racing a lot at the time. I was in really good shape, but eventually I just could barely stay above water. I was starting to go under. I got to the point where I was treading water, and I looked, I'm thinking to myself, I have about 5 more minutes of treading water left in me. And I looked around, I scanned the horizon. I didn't see anything that I felt could get to me and rescue me that was within 5 minutes of me. And I became really concerned about the possibility of actually drowning. But then, as I rise up on a swell, I look out into the horizon, and I see the same trawler that had hit me. Apparently, the guy didn't want to be guilty of manslaughter, and he came back to look for me. And he wasn't quite coming towards me, but when I got to the top of a swell, I was able to wave my arm. And right away, the trawler turned towards me. I was really glad at that moment that I had kept that yellow raincoat on. The trawler came right up to me. I was amazed. The trawler that ran us over before was able to come within 6 inches of me and just stop. The mate on the trawler throws a rope over the side, and I grab it. I'm holding onto the rope, but then he looks over the side, and he actually yells down, "Climb up!" I was way too tired to climb up, and I can't climb. I only have one hand. I'm holding onto my sunglasses. Eventually, the guy figures out I'm not going to climb up, so he throws another rope over, and this one has a big loop on it. And I'm able to put my arm through the loop and kind of hang on like that. And they put the other end of the rope through the winch that they use to winch the nets up onto the boat. And they start winching me up the side of this trawler. And as I get to deck level, I look at the mate, I look him right in the eye, and I say, "These are my sunglasses. Be very careful of them." And I put them on the deck. Now I'm able to climb the rope, and I'm able to climb the rope. I get onto the trawler. The guy doesn't understand that I couldn't climb because I was holding my sunglasses, so he grabs me and tries to help me on, and it's this big awkward wrestling match. And finally I get myself onto the trawler, and immediately I turn around and I bend down to pick up my sunglasses, and they're gone. I was so angry. Oh, these guys are like asking me all kinds of questions like, are you okay? And are you cold? And do you want something to drink? And I'm so angry, I can't even talk to them. I just find a little corner on the deck of this boat where I could be alone, and I just stand there and sulk. They motor me back to the dock. I don't even wait for them to tie the boat up. I just hop off onto the dock. I want to go home. The captain's yelling something at me. I don't even care. But I get onto shore, and I'm kind of surprised to see that there's a lot of commotion. There's a lot going on at Hampton Beach that day. There were some ambulances parked out in the parking area. The Coast Guard was there, and there's this huge crowd of people over on the breakwater. And I'm thinking, well, this is pretty good. I'm going to have a little scoop, for Paul. Like, I'm going to have something to tell Paul when he gets back from fishing. So I start walking over towards the crowd on the breakwater, and I'm going to find out what's going on. And I look, and I see Paul in the crowd, and he starts walking towards me. And I'm really confused. I'm thinking, what was Paul doing in that crowd in the breakwater? And then it occurs to me, obviously, he was on the breakwater making a few casts. There's pretty good fishing off of the breakwater. And he comes walking up to me, and he gets up to me, and I say to him, catch anything? And he doesn't stop walking. He comes right up to me, and he gives me a big hug. We'd known each other for years. We'd never hugged. I was so confused. I was so puzzled. I couldn't understand why he just hugged me. I'm thinking, like, do we do this now? Is this what? And I stood there just like I'm standing here now. I was feeling really awkward. I didn't know what to say. So I told him. I broke the bad news to him. I said, I lost my sunglasses. He looked at me and said, what? I said, my Oakleys. I lost my Oakley sunglasses. And he looked at me and said, I thought I lost my best friend. Though that was many years ago, I haven't missed the sunglasses.
None of my grandparents were born in this country. On my mother's side, they came from Poland. On my father's, from Hungary. None of them knew very much English when they arrived here. And based on my memories of the two that were alive when I was a child, they didn't learn much more after living in the country for many years. My Polish grandparents came to join family who had emigrated earlier and had settled in a Polish neighborhood in Connecticut, where the native language was spoken more than just in the home, in the community as well. My Hungarian grandparents had a little different experience. They didn't choose to live in a Hungarian neighborhood in the bigger cities like Bridgeport, Fairfield, or New Haven. My grandfather, and I don't know how he did this, managed to buy a piece of land in a rural area of Connecticut, and he farmed. He was a Hungarian gypsy farmer in a rural, Yankee-rooted town, Gyulafrai, where other farmers were named Jones, Beardsley, Hawley. With his olive skin, dark hair, handlebar mustache, and speaking a guttural and gruff language that was a lot more foreign-sounding than the Polish and Italian spoken by the majority of immigrants in that area, he was an outlier. I had a taste of what he and my grandmother went through when my husband and I made a trip to both Poland and Hungary in 1999. We did pretty well in Poland. A lot of people spoke English, but it was a little different in Hungary. And we had an experience in the train station in Budapest. There in that busy, bustling crowd, people moving everywhere, noisy, dirty, smelly, we couldn't find where to buy a ticket. Now, I knew what time the train to Tokai was coming. I could read the sign. I knew which track to stand beside, but we didn't have a ticket. We walked all around that station, up and down, looking for someone to speak English to answer a simple question. Even asking a uniformed guard didn't help. He saw my frustration, my panic as the time was getting closer to the time the train would arrive, and he calmly tried to calm me down. Did I speak German? No. Maybe I spoke Russian? No. We were definitely outliers in that Eastern European country by virtue of not knowing the language, and it was not a pleasant experience. My mother, from a young age, decided she did not want the designation of outlier. She did not want to be pointed at as the daughter of an immigrant. Although she spoke Polish at home, outside the home, she was 100% American. We did not learn to speak Polish, her children. So it was a surprise to her when I became interested in both my Polish and Hungarian languages and the cultures of my ancestors. I became a storyteller, and I focused on those folk tales from the old country. At one point, when she was alive, she said to me, "I don't know where you came from." But there was a time when she did ask me to tell a story in front of a family group, so I think she was proud. I'd like to share with you a story from Hungary that I have renamed for this event, The Outlier Prince. A kívülálló királyfi. Egy szer volt, hol nem volt. Once there was, once there was not. A kívülálló királyfi. A prince who was an outlier in his own family. You see, he was not the oldest son of the king, clever and smart and destined to be king himself one day. He was not the second-born son of the king, strong and brave and anxious to lead the king's soldiers in battle. No, a kívülálló királyfi was the third son of the king, and he had no special talent. He was not musically inclined. He could not play beautiful music or sing to entertain his father's guests. He was not artistic. He couldn't draw beautiful murals on the walls of the castle for everyone to admire. He was not good with his hands to build things or fix things. He did not have a green thumb when working in the castle gardens. His father said of him, "That youngest son of mine, he's useless. He doesn't even have a good story to tell." Hot. So, a kívülálló királyfi decided to go out into the world and find some stories and become a storyteller and make his father proud. Hot. So, a kívülálló királyfi ment mendegilt, walked and walked and walked, but he came to no one who could tell him a story. All he saw was a little rabbit at the edge of the forest. He had a sense of humor, so he leaned down and he said to the rabbit, "Tenyel, rabbit, tutsa nekem mesét mondani? Can you tell me a story?" "Van nagyobb dolgom attól. I have more important things to do." And the rabbit hopped away. Hot, a kívülálló királyfi ment mendegilt, until he came to a fox. "Farkas testvér, Mr. Fox, tudsz nekem mesét mondani?" "Van nagyobb dolgom attól. I have more important things to do. Menj el innen. Leave me alone." And the fox raced through the forest. Hot, a kívülálló királyfi ment mendegilt, until he came to a bear. Medye Batyam, Serber, Tutseneke Meshid Mondani? Vanna Jabdolga Matol, Menyel Inen, Menyel Azadamol, get out of my way. Hot. Akilalu Kiraifi, who by this time was a bush Kiraifi, a sad prince. Mendegeld, until he came to the edge of a village. And there he saw a house with candles lit in the window. And when he went up to the door and pushed it open, here we are, telling each other stories. You may not be able to see him, but Kilaluf Kiraifi is in the doorway, listening to us. We should invite him in. He's one of us. He's an outlier, no more.
Good evening. A little nervous up here. So I came to the Mudroom for the first time in September, and when I left that evening with the word outliers ringing in my ears, I thought I couldn't think of a better topic for me to write a story about or tell a story about. Much of my life has been lived as an outlier, and so it was just a matter of finding the right story. So then I started thinking, well, what in my life has shaped who I am today as a person who's grown into somebody who makes bold choices, lives outside the box, and is a bit more unconventional than most people. So what really has shaped my life, I think, was my early years in my life as a model. I started out at a very young age, about 13, my career started. A lot of people will ask how I got started, and I just say, you know, you kind of hear it a lot, like, oh, I was walking down the street and somebody spotted me and asked me to start modeling, and that really is how it happens a lot of the time. And that's how it happened for me. Somebody just sort of spotted me and offered me an opportunity. Things happened pretty quickly for me when I started modeling. My career took off pretty fast. All through high school, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, so I got with an agency in Chicago. And I spent all my high school years, rather than going away for holidays and breaks and things like that with my family, my mom and I would jump in a car and drive to Chicago, and I started molding my career that way. I moved to New York City after I graduated from high school. And I think because everything happened sort of effortlessly for me, and I had a lot of people who believed in my success and supported me and things like that, when I moved to New York, I just sort of assumed things were supposed to sort of happen like that for me. I wanted Steven Meisel and Versace and Sports Illustrated like the minute I moved there, and my agents were like, it's got to take time, people have to get to know who you are, you have to mold your career. So for the first couple years, things went well. I worked with great photographers. I was very sheltered. You know, when I moved to New York, I saw other models that were going out in the nightclubs and partying, and I noticed I was being whisked away to like the Hamptons with my agents' families, like going to bed at 9 o'clock every night. And but I understood why, and I was okay with that. So after a little while, I started to get restless. Things weren't happening as quickly as I wanted them to. And instead of building rapport and relationship with one agency, I started hopping around to different places. And I think over a couple years, I started slipping through the cracks. You know, people started seeing me as sort of flaky and not as reliable as somebody who just sat still and let somebody work with them. And also, I started getting sick of being sheltered. You know, we all know that age of 19, 20. I started finding my voice. I started knowing a little bit more about who I was as a person. And I didn't want to be sheltered anymore. I was becoming a little more rebellious. I think I also started getting a little bit resentful towards the business. I started seeing a darker side of the industry. You know, I think when people know that I've modeled, they think, wow, what a glamorous lifestyle, traveling the world, and photographers, and flashing lights, and runways, and dinners with celebrities. And yes, it is all of that, but there's another side to it that I think a lot of people, if you're not in the industry, you don't always know about. especially as a model, you know, you can be very scrutinized as a model by your agents, by photographers. You know, when I was 19, I went to Greece for a job. This is just one of many examples. And nobody met me at the airport. I'd never been to Greece. I didn't speak the language. It was a Sunday. I went to the hotel. Nobody met me at the hotel. The next day, I got in a taxi to go to my job, and I couldn't tell the guy where I was going. He didn't understand me. So he opened the door and threw my bag out. I mean, he almost threw me out with it. Finally got to the job, and within an hour of being there, the photographer basically, in so many words, was like, part of the job is taking your clothes off. And I was like, no, that's not okay with me. And I left immediately. So that's just one of many examples of things that can start to wear down a young girl in that industry. You know, you walk into your agency, and agents by nature are sort of boisterous, kind of loud people. That's their job, is to get new clients and get models connected with the right people. And so you walk in and everybody stares and whips out a tape measure and starts measuring you in front of 20, 30 people. And all you're looked at is, you know, your hair, your makeup, if you've slept the night before, and if you're drinking enough water. And that's all anybody talks about, is how you're looking. And so, you know, like I said, I was at that age where I started to realize that physically I fit into that business, but spiritually and emotionally that really wasn't for me. At the same time, I had spent all these years building up this business and this career that was supposed to make me this top model and make me millions of dollars, and I didn't want to let everybody down. Again, at that age, you know, we often feel that way. We don't want to let down the people in our lives. So I started to become a little bit tormented about not wanting to do this anymore, but not wanting to let people down, losing my self-esteem. The once very confident girl who went into the industry with a lot of self-esteem became very, you know, I'd walk into my agency kind of like this, and just became a lot less confident. And I got tired of being sheltered. You know, I wanted to go out with the models who were partying and going out to nightclubs and dating celebrities and having fun. So I did. I was like, you know, if I'm going to do something I don't really want to be doing, I'm at least going to try to have fun while I'm doing it. So I started going out and, you know, staying out all night, and the parties turned into the next day. I eventually met a boyfriend who was very involved in that nightlife scene in New York. And it really didn't take long for me to just really dive into that world. It was just a way for me, I think, to numb the feelings I had about feeling insecure and tormented, not really wanting to be in the business anymore. So, you know, that turned into serious drug and alcohol abuse eventually. You know, anybody who's ever lived in that world or knows somebody who has knows what it's like. And luckily, it didn't last for a decade. It lasted 3 or 4 years, but it was probably the darkest time of my life. It was just a vicious cycle of just self-abuse, you know, hating myself for what I was doing, but the only way to feel better about it was to keep doing it. And knowing that I came from this strong family of like amazing women and my father, and having nieces that looked up to me, so knowing I couldn't go on like this for much longer. And finally, I couldn't take anymore. I had a couple of breakdowns where I really didn't think I was going to live anymore. So eventually I reached out and asked for help. And, you know, once I did that and I started turning my life around, as quickly as it seemed, the modeling came into my life. And this is, of course, in hindsight. It seems just as quickly so many beautiful things came into my life. All the right books fell into my lap. The teachers and the mentors seemed to appear out of nowhere. I got rid of all of these people and this dark nightlife and this scene that was in my life, and all of these amazing people came into my life, and I developed new friendships. And by getting out of that life, it set the stage for where I am today in my life. I started this path of self-discovery and healing, spirituality. I'm half Native American. I got very involved in my culture and started understanding my traditions and my spirituality in that regard. And I think what I ended up getting from all of that is, you know, the darkest times of our lives, or the things we look back on in our lives and we might regret or wish they had turned out differently, can be the greatest opportunity to learn and grow. And I look at my life, if I hadn't had the courage to start modeling, and if I hadn't gone through the depression and the darkness and the drug abuse, I wouldn't be on the path I am today. And I'm so passionate today about empowering other people, inspiring other people to live their best lives, their most meaningful lives. And I think it's just a matter of not taking, I had to go through that process of, I would look back at my life and think, God, Erin, you had so much opportunity to succeed and make this career for yourself, and you made a lot of poor choices. And I think a lot of us do that in life. But sometimes those poor choices and the doors that closed on us only open better doors in the future. So thank you for hearing my story tonight.
Good evening. I hope I can do half as well as the previous speakers, but anyway, I'll try. My story begins or happened in 1948 when I was 9 years old. So if you do the math, you know that I'm not as young as most of you. At that time, I met someone who was definitely an outlier, but not in a good way. It was in a negative way. He had a very commanding, but commanding but scary demeanor about him. The kind where you didn't want to cross him, and you definitely, if he said to do something, you definitely wanted to go ahead and do it. Anyway, Marshfield, Mass. At that time was a rural community, and houses were pretty far apart. For that reason, most of the kids that played together after school then depended on bikes to get around so they could meet their friends. I had an old bike that was a real beater. It had one speed, it had balloon tires, coaster brakes, and no fenders. But it got me around. And Joe, which is the outlier that I'm speaking of, decided to, for some reason, to kind of join our playing group. So he kind of became part of what we were at that time. One day, Joe asked me if I would mind going down to his house, which is about a half a mile away, and look at something that he wanted to show me. Could I say no? No. So I went along and went to his house. When we got there, he guided me around the house to the overgrown field in the back. And in the back of that field was an old chicken coop, half hidden in the weeds. Inside the chicken coop was chicken wire, feeders, hoppers, waterers, and a few small cages. But in one of those cages was a very unhappy, bedraggled cat curled up in one corner. I looked at this in disgust, but Joe explained that he wanted to do some things with that cat, which involved, I don't know, guy wires, cages, things that were definitely torture in my mind. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, but I didn't want to incur his wrath. Well, out of desperation, I finally suggested that, hey, it's getting late in the afternoon. We don't have much time to set up what you want to do. Why don't I come back right after school tomorrow, and we'll have more time to do what you want me to do, or what you want to do. Surprisingly, he agreed to this. So when I got the opportunity, I politely said, oh, I need to go home now, and I left, hopped on my beater bike, and pedaled home. It was about the fastest trip home I'd ever made on that bike. On the way home, I got thinking that Joe took my suggestion pretty easily, where he might have otherwise been suspicious. Then I realized that it's probably because Joe didn't really know that he was doing anything wrong. This made the whole afternoon seem even more scary. When I got home that night and sat down to dinner, I was too nervous to eat. But just at that point, the telephone rang. My father went to answer it. When he came back, he asked me if I had seen my neighbor who lived across the street, if I had seen their cat. When he described the cat, I knew right away where that cat was, and I burst out crying. So my dad said, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" So I had to explain to him what had happened that afternoon and everything that was in Joe's mind. My dad said, "Well, we'll see about this." He went back to the phone, called the police. What seemed like a few seconds later, the police arrived, and the police chief came in. We only had one policeman in the town at the time because it was a small town. The chief came in, who was friends with my dad, and he wanted to talk to me, so I had to explain my story a third time that day, which I did. The chief thanked me for my information and said that he would take care of the situation right away, and he left. Well, about an hour later, the phone rang again. This time it was my next door neighbor across the street who wanted to talk to me. When I got on the phone, he told me that indeed it was his cat. He had his cat back, and he was so indebted to me that he just thanked me over and over again. Not being used to being showered with praise, I mumbled something like "thank you" or something like that, but really all I could think of was the beating I was about to take the following day at school. Well, the next day the sun rose, much to my disappointment, and I had to face the music. It wouldn't do any good to pretend I was sick, because in our house, to play hooky, you couldn't do that. You'd have to be able to hold your breath until you turn purple, or maybe you'd have to be able to vomit on command or something really serious. So I had no recourse but to go to school. Well, I rode my bike down the long driveway and got on the bus. Right behind the driver was half of an empty seat, the other half being occupied by some young girl. So I took that seat right behind the driver. So what if it was a girl next to me? I would have ridden in the driver's lap if he'd let me. But I was so apprehensive that I didn't even dare look around to see if Joe was on the bus. So when the bus pulled up to school, I made sure I was first off the bus, and I ran into my classroom and sat down. The rest of the school day was uneventful. I didn't see Joe anywhere. On the way home, I was lucky enough to get the same seat, and the girl sat there also, and she gave me a pained look of, "What are you doing?" or something like that, but I didn't care. On the way home, I got to thinking, well, maybe Joe is hiding in the bushes at my stop, and he's going to beat me up when I get off the bus. No, what do I do now? But the only recourse I had was to get off the bus and run as hard as I could to my bike and see if I could make it. Well, I did that, and sure enough, I got to my bike, which was undisturbed, hopped on, rode the long driveway up to the house, and went in. No Joe. That night at supper time again, I was way too nervous to eat, even though my mother had fixed one of my favorite meals. But just then, my dad came in and breezily said, Well, I guess you won't have to worry about dealing with that cat torturer again. Yeah, that blankety blank cat torturer. You can fill in the blanks with your own favorite expletives, because my father was one who didn't mix words or mince words when he was making a strong statement. When I heard that, I said, why? He said, well, the authorities came this morning and they took the kid to some sort of a juvenile detention center or something, and so you won't see him for a while. Such a relief came over me. It was like having the 1,000-pound elephant that had been sitting on my chest all day finally decide to get up and leave. I then noticed that dinner was still on the table, smelled good, and I was able to dig in, which made my mother pleased no end. After dinner, my dad took me by the shoulder and said, come on, I want to go out to the barn with you for a bit. This puzzled me because whenever we had taken a walk to the barn before, it usually involved some form of punishment. But I couldn't think of anything that I'd done wrong recently. So out to the barn we went, and when we got there, he opened the door and turned on the light, and there on the floor sat a brand new bike with balloon tires, but I had a 3-speed shift on the handlebars along with handbrakes. Oh yeah, and fenders too. While I was gawking at that, without being able to speak, my father said, I'm proud of the way you handled yourself yesterday, so I thought you deserved a new bike. My father, that was probably one of the kindest things my father had ever done for me that I can remember. At that point, I burst into tears again within 24 hours. But this time they were tears of joy and tears of gratitude and tears of relief. I never knew what happened to Joe because I never saw him again, but nor do I want to. Thank you.
I got to play with this mic. I'm all about the bass. So I'm going to ask you guys to imagine a younger, if not better looking version of me. It's the summer before my senior year of college, and I was a student at a fancy schmancy university in the Bay Area, and I was studying modern thought and literature. And I was very, very interested in the construction of meaning, of understanding things like capitalism and the concept of modernity and how a painting or a poem constructs a story. In short, I was kind of a pompous ass. But it was the summer before my senior year, and I needed to get a job. And I was living in my grandparents' apartment in their little row house in San Francisco in the Sunset District. And my cousin, who is a contractor, got me a job as a laborer on a remodel of an old Victorian mansion in San Francisco. And I don't know anything about construction, so I was the laborer. But I think I had this romantic notion that I was going to work on the craft of my hands. Just like we have the craft of writing or of painting, I was going to do the thing with your hands, with these craftsmen. You can see where this is going. It was a really hard job. Basically, my job was to hump old construction debris down many flights of stairs to the dumpster, right? And I'm the only college boy. And the other, I'll just say it was a pretty rough crew. okay? So, like, just to give you an example of the rough crew, one of these guys I worked with was this giant man. He's like 6'10". And one day we were like hanging sheetrock on the ceiling of these high ceilings. And the way you do that, I guess, is you get up on a ladder and you're actually holding the sheetrock with your head up, you know, while some guy nails it off. And all of a sudden, this big giant man quotes that great piece of film noir from David Lynch, Blue Velvet. He goes, "Fuck Heineken, Pabst Blue Ribbon." Or, to give you another example of my job site, you know, we would go out on the front step to eat lunch in the sunshine. And we were the kind of job site that women needed to cross the street to walk by the job, because the jackal howls coming from these dudes was really, really intense, right? And so I'm the college boy eating lunch with these guys, right? My PBJ, 2 cookies and an apple that my grandma had packed for me in a paper bag, while the dudes are talking about their stuff. And usually, so I'm just trying to stay as small as I can, you know, wait. But then every once in a while, kind of the lead guy, who was this small, wiry guy, would sort of turn to me and say, "Pete, tell us one of your stories." And it would, so I felt like an outlier. I'm like, I'm different from these guys. No, what I need, and this is a particularly bad summer day, one of these days, I'm just like, I need an aesthetic experience. What I need is an aesthetic experience. So I think about going to the San Francisco MoMA, which is one of those great museum. But I think, no, the Temple of Nature can also provide us with our aesthetic experiences. I'm gonna go to the beach. So I ride my bicycle back to Grandma's basement. I borrow Grandma's car. I drive down to the Great Highway, which if any of you guys have been to San Francisco, you know, you drive along the coast and it's just miles of this incredible west-facing broad beach, huge Pacific Ocean waves, nothing breaking it. And I drive up to San Francisco's municipal beach. It's called Ocean Beach. And Ocean Beach is another big, broad expanse, and they have this seawall at the back of the beach with different stairways, concrete seawall, stairways, say every 50 feet cut into the beach. It's a cloudy, overcast day, sun is setting, no tourists, so the place is empty. I have my choice of anywhere to park along this miles-long beach, and I happen to choose on this fateful day, Stairway 27. So I park at Stairway 27. There are no other cars. I get out of the car and I start to walk down to the beach, and sure enough, it was a great day. There's like it's cloudy, and the wind is blowing, and I can already hear the surf, you know, coming up, and the sun is coming through this really cool cloud pattern, and you know, it's kind of setting sun, and actually refracting off of these big waves in cool ways. And I think to myself as I'm walking down to the beach, this is kind of like, you know, Kandinsky color field painting. This is like a Kandinsky. So, an aesthetic experience. I'm there, I'm having it. I walk right down to the water's edge. I'm watching the waves go back and forth, and it's that, you know, big white barrels, and you can watch down the thing, and they're kind of all in time, right? Coming forward, back, forward, back. And then I'm watching the wave that's right in front of me, and instead of kind of staying in lockstep with the other waves, it sort of slows a bit, so it's kind of out of step. I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. And I look a little closer at the wave, and I realize, that's not just a wave. There's something in that wave. And I'm looking again, and now it rolls right up at my feet. And it's not just a wave, it's a body. And it's not a seal or a whale or a fish. It's a person. Aesthetic experience, poof. Okay, there's these 2 surfers coming in. The only people in the whole thing, there's these 2 surfers over there, they're coming in. I'm like, you know, so they come over, I wade into the surf, I grab the arms, one of the guys grabs the legs, and we sort of lift the guy up and come up above the water line. and drop him down in the sand. And I'll never forget, I'm looking at him, and his arm, as you drop his arm, as an arm will do, sort of drops in the sand and goes boom, boom. And it looked so natural. It looked like somebody, a human being, moving their arm, putting their arm down. And yet, you look at this guy's eyes, and there ain't nobody there. He's dead. And the funny thing is, I found out later, these surfer guys, they're like Navy SEALs. I had been a high school lifeguard, right? And what you're supposed to do in this occasion, right, is, start doing CPR. And we look at him and we're like, oh, no, I don't know CPR. Do you know CPR? No, I don't know CPR. Because nobody wants to go do mouth-to-mouth on the dead guy. I mean, he's dead, right? So there is a jogger jogging by just then, and this is the pre-cell phone era, so we tell him to go call 911. He goes to call the emergency folks, and we're kind of looking at the body. And so if I can describe it to you, he's a sort of nondescript, kind of maybe older white guy. I was young then, so I don't even know what older means anymore, but he's wearing only boxer shorts. He has no identifying marks of any kind. He has no rings, he has no watches, he has nothing on him, only white boxer shorts. He doesn't look mutilated. There's no obvious signs of trauma. He just kind of has this glazed look in his eyes, and he's just like a dead body. And we're sort of like, where did he come from? And you look out to sea, and there's no boats out there. And we're about 5 miles around the corner from the mouth of the Golden Gate. Was he a jumper from the bridge? We don't know. There's just no way to tell. And sort of thinking about this and tripping, and sort of look over our shoulder, and sure enough, the lights from the emergency services, we can already see this whole sort of convoy of emergency folks driving down the road due west to the beach. And it really is a convoy. There's like the paramedics, but there's a bunch of fire trucks, and there's a bunch of police cars, and all these guys are coming, and they pull up, and then pretty soon, a couple of these, the first guys that arrive kind of come down to the water's edge, and, I'd like to say they moved fast. They kind of slowly jogged, because they sort of knew the drill. And the first paramedic guys get there, and they do the appropriate things, put their finger on his pulse. And they're like, yep, he's dead. No resuscitation, no nothing. And me and the surfers are kind of feeling guilty, and we're like, so how long do you think he was in the water? Could he have just drowned just now? And they say, well, with this cold water, you really don't know in the ocean beach. But we can tell you that typically if they've been in there for more than half an hour, the crabs start to eat them. So, this guy was uncrab eaten, so he had been in there sort of fairly freshly. And, we're really tripping, and then all these other emergency personnel guys start, continue. They're coming down even slower, and they all sort of gather around the body. And what we later learned was the emergency personnel in San Francisco love these calls for drowning at Ocean Beach, because it becomes the occasion for like a little hoedown. So everybody comes, and they sort of hang out, and they're like talking about their day. Joe, how was your day off? How you doing? And it's the 80s, so a lot of guys are smokers, so they pull out their cigarettes, and we're all literally standing around. This guy's in the middle, and all these people are standing around. The guys are smoking and sort of tamping their ashes. And the ashes are blowing in the wind pattern, and kind of falling on the guy, and everybody's studiously ignoring the dead guy in the middle of us. I'm the only one who cares. And then just to kind of the height of ignominy, this is a true story. He's wearing his boxer shorts, and they have the little slit in the front where, where you're supposed to urinate or whatever, and he was kind of hanging out of his boxer shorts. I was just like, shit. This is crazy. And so then what ensues is this sort of Keystone Cops scene where the patrolman whips out his pad, and he's like, okay, who saw this first? And I'm like, I saw it first. And so he writes down the story, and then he has to tell the story to his sergeant, and he totally gets the story wrong, even though it's a simple story, and we have to tell it again. And finally he's done. He closes his pad, and he says, all right, you boys can get out of here now. And we're like, is there any chance that after you complete your investigation, you'll be able to, can we find out what you learned? He's like, this is official police business, sir. you're a civilian. No, you'll never know. And we're like, oh shit. So we walk kind of slowly. I walk slowly back up to my car, and now the sun's going down, and I walk up the stairs, stairway 27, and I get to my car, and I realize I'm going to be thinking about never knowing for a while, because there's so many cop cars and fire engines, and they've all pretended to be an emergency, so they pulled in like at an angle and they left their doors open, and the lights are all flashing, you know. But the funny weird thing is it's sunset and the lights are all flashing, those cool different emergency lights, and I think to myself, it's kind of like a Kandinsky. That's the end of my story.